I'm talking about building awesome CLI apps with PHP. I'm Marcel. I'm CTO at Beyond Code. We create developer tools such as Tinkerwell, Windy, Halo. You might have used some of them. If you want to follow me on Twitter, that's my handle. I tweet mostly about PHP and Laravel-related stuff. So let's dive right in, because we have a lot to cover. So why should you, in the first place, build something for the CLI? I think there are a couple of reasons. The first one is it's very fun to build. If you are a more back-end focused developer, like probably a lot of us are, then dealing with CSS is maybe not the most enjoyable task. So pushing pixels just to make something look pretty might not be what you want to do. So if you focus on the CLI and the terminal app, you kind of improve on that because there isn't as much as you can do on the CLI. CLI apps are easy to use. I'm a huge fan of GUI-based applications, but for example, I never got used to Git-based GUI apps. I don't know, it doesn't work for me. I feel more productive if I use it on the CLI. If I'm actually more productive, I doubt it, but it feels better. And they are also way better to automate. So if you want to run a task after a deployment, for example, you can just pipe something to a CLI command. It just works. Way easier than doing this somewhere hidden behind a post request on a Laravel app. Now, you might wonder, why are we using PHP for a CLI app? Isn't PHP only for web apps? And well, in fact, I think most of you are using CLI-based applications every day without maybe knowing it. So here are some examples of PHP-based CLI apps. So first of all, we have Laravel Valet. If you're using a Mac and use Valet to host your local sites, you are interacting with Valet through a PHP-based CLI app. So every time you secure a local site, all of this running through PHP. We have Expose that we created, which is sort of an Angorg alternative, completely written in PHP and open source, also works on the CLI. Then we have Composer itself. So Composer, every time you do a Composer update, install, whatever, this is running through a PHP-based application on the terminal. And even you can do crazy stuff, like play Tetris on the terminal. So that's what I've been waiting for, to play Tetris on a stage. So this one was built by Sean McCool, and it's in PHP. It's Tetris. You can rotate blocks. You can just place them, and that's what I'm going to do for the rest of the talk. So you can make scores. It just works. Game over. And he live streamed the whole process of creating Tetris. So if you're into this, be sure to check it out. I'm also going to tweet out the stream later. Really cool. And well, of course, we're at the Laracon. So every time you write a little artisan command, you are essentially writing a CLI app. A tiny CLI app that ships with all your web app, but it's a CLI app at the end. So I thought it would be fun and challenging and stressful to do live coding, so that we build our own CLI application. I want to build like a to-do app where we can create tasks, mark them as finished, delete them, stuff like that. We are going to use Laravel 0. There are other CLI frameworks that we could use. For example, there's Mini CLI, which Erica Heidi is going to talk about later. But we're going to use Laravel 0 simply because I feel like if you know Laravel, you just get used to Laravel 0 in no time. So, enough slides. Let's do some live coding. So this is now a pre-installed Laravel 0 app because I don't want to bore you with a Composer install. And it's more or less a blank Laravel app, a Laravel 0 app. And if you know Laravel, this already feels very familiar. We have our app folder where we have our commands. We can have service providers. I already created a model, so you can also have models and migrations on the CLI. I'm using SQLite for this. So I already created a task model, which just has nothing guarded, and a simple table for our tasks that hold the task itself, and a simple date time to mark a task as completed or not. And as you might notice, we don't have an artisan command in Laravel 0, and that's because, well, the artisan command is basically our CLI application. So when you install Laravel 0, you can basically rename the app however you want, and that's then the artisan command. So in our case, it's called to do. And when we jump into the console and don't play Tetris, we can run to do, and this is basically the output of artisan, but it's our standalone CLI application. And as you can see, we have our own commands, so the inspire command, and then a whole bunch of commands that Laravel 0 ships with that we can use to install additional dependencies, create commands, run tests, stuff like that. So for our to-do app, I think we need, well, two main commands at least. So first of all, we want to make a new command that allows us to add a task. So let's create an add task command. And then once we added them, we also want to show them. So let's create a list tasks command as well. And in our code, we now have these two blank commands. If we take a look at them, they are very familiar with a Laravel command because that's essentially what they are. And we have a signature. So to add a new task, it would be something like add, and then provide the task as the argument. We have a description, like add a new task. We have a handle method that contains all of our actual logic. And then this one's a bit special. We also have a schedule method. So in Laravel 0, just like with the CLI kernel, we can schedule individual commands. So if you write a standalone CLI app, you could schedule a certain command to run every minute, every hour, every 15 minutes, whatever. And then on your server or your computer that actually runs this CLI app, you can basically just call the schedule run command, put it in your cron job, and then use the scheduling like you do in Laravel with Laravel 0. We don't need to schedule adding tasks, so let's get rid of that. All right, so adding a new task is really simple. All we do is we just create a new task model, and the task is going to be the task argument. And then let's just dump out task was added successfully. All right, and then to list our tasks, the signature is something like list tasks. Description, list all tasks. We don't need to schedule anything. And then to handle this, we're basically going to just read all the tasks from the database, like that. And then we have multiple ways of how we want to show the data to the user. So as I said, it's on the terminal, so we are a bit restricted. And so like the first thing that we could do is we could just loop over the tasks or use a collection because loops are bad, and then do something like info out the task of the task. And then if we add a couple, so let's say prepare Laracon talk and give Laracon talk. And now if we list them, we just have a very boring standard output. We could also use, which ships with Laravel 0, something that's called termwind. What termwind does is it allows us to pass an HTML-like string, and then termwind is going to parse the HTML and represent it for us in a way that the terminal understands it. And what's cool about it is that we can make use of Tailwind CSS classes. So we could do something like render, that's the method from termwind, and then render a string of HTML. So something like a div that has some padding, let's say a BG red 200, a black text, hi Laracon, close up the div. And now if we render this, we see some nicer output. So you could use termwind and use HTML. Not all HTML texts are supported, obviously, because it's not HTML. But we could use that to build up a nicer looking UI. Or last but not least, we can just use the table method that we have available in Laravel and render a table, so something like the task and the status. And then the actual data would be our tasks. And then we are going to return, well, the actual task. And if the task was completed, we return done, and otherwise just a blank line. And then we have a more or less nice looking table. And well, with these two commands, I think we can already have a pretty decent task manager if you want. We can add tasks. But now, what if we want to actually mark a task as completed? So we would need to probably print out the ID and then have a command like to do, complete, pass in the ID, or the same for deletion. That's not very user-friendly. And to be honest, I wouldn't use such a CLI app. What I would prefer is having something that feels more like a GUI application, so an interactive app where we can see our tasks, maybe mark them as checked, delete them, have shortcuts. So let's see how we can actually achieve that. So first of all, we're going to create a new command that we call interactive list command. There it is. So the signature is just going to be interactive. Show an interactive task list. We don't need to schedule anything. All right, so Laravel 0 ships with a bundle of dependencies that you can install optional. So one of those is called a CLI menu. So we can, and the name is a bit confusing, and I'll show you why. So we can create a new menu using the CLI menu builder, give it a title, let's say tasks, then build the menu, and then we're going to open up the menu. And now if I run this command using to-do interactive, it's a nicer UI. We have this title that says tasks, and as you can see, the main difference is this command stays open all the time. It's not just dumping a string and then exiting. It also clears out all the previous commands, so it goes full screen, and it's open and waiting for user input. So if I exit, I'm back at the terminal. So now what we could do is we can just add the tasks to this menu. I'm going to move this into a separate method because we are going to reuse this. So we want to build up the menu like this. We receive a menu instance, and now we can basically just pull out all the tasks from the database and then add them to our menu. So we are just going to loop over them. And what we want to do is we want to add a new item for each task that we have, but we don't just want to add a simple item, we can also add checkbox items, which is really cool. So we're going to add a new checkbox. A checkbox, it's going to be a new checkbox item. This one has a text. The text is going to be our actual task. And then we can provide a callable as the second argument, which will be called every time we check or uncheck this box. So here we could do something like this, toggle task. And then we also need to add something like, so if the task is already completed, we want to mark the checkbox as checked. All right, so let's just add the toggle task method in here. This one also receives the menu, and don't implement it yet. All right, so if we run the command again, we now have these cool looking checkboxes that we can toggle. When we toggle them, the code in our toggle task method will be executed, which doesn't do anything just yet. And I think this is already pretty cool that we can have real checkboxes on the terminal. So to add the actual implementation, what we would do is we need to receive the task, but we only, since we're on the CLI, we only have the text of the items. So we can do something like, let's just get the task where the actual task is the selected items text. So if you have two tasks that have the same name, this is going to break, so you probably want to do something like add the ID and then strip it out using some regex or something like that. So we get the first task that matches, and then basically just update it and say, well, it's going to be completed. So if the task was already completed, we're just going to set it to null, otherwise to now. All right, so prepare Laracon talk is already done. Let's close it up, and it should be pre-checked now. OK, cool. So now we preserve state. Next up, we need to add a way to insert new tasks in our little CLI app. So to do this, we're going to add a new item to our menu. This is going to be a new selectable item, so just a simple one that has a text like add new task. And once again, we have a callable, something like this, add task. So once we select that, we also receive the CLI menu as an argument. We want, best case, to show like a modal or some sort of prompt where we ask the user for its task and then add it to the database. And we can do this with the CLI menu, and that's why I think it's much more than just a menu. So we can say we want to ask for text. You could also ask for numbers or passwords. Then we set a prompt. So the prompt to ask for it would be, what's your task? Then we have a validation failed text. So if you just enter or press enter, don't type in anything. Please provide the task. So now that it's built up, we're going to actually ask that, which is going to show up the UI. And then we are going to fetch the actual typed in response. And let's just store it in a task name, like this. And if the task name is not empty, we're going to actually store it in our database. All right, so let's see how it looks. So here we have our new selectable item. If you choose it, we get this. Well, fair enough, it doesn't look pretty, but you can style it. But we get this little prompt where we can add some new tasks. So do live coding, or mess up typing. But, well, we added it to the database, but we're not in like a view or React app. This is not reactive. So if we now reopen it, we should see it, but we don't see it right away. So let's fix that. So once we add a new task, and as we're just on the terminal and can't really change any DOM elements, what we basically need to do is we need to rebuild our menu. So we need to remove everything and build everything up again. So we're just basically going to call build menu again after adding the task. And well, now it would just add all these items again underneath. So to fix that, we're going to loop over the menu first, get all the items, and then remove every single one of those items. Like that. Then we're going to add our tasks. And last but not least, we have to make a little check to see, well, if the menu is already open, we have to redraw it. And then this is going to basically add the new items immediately. So let's give it a try. Add new task, foo. There it is. We immediately just redraw our table. And as you can see, the exit menu item is gone because that's the default menu item, so we would need to add that ourselves now. All right, last but not least, I want to be able to delete a task. And because it's the CLI, we can't just press a button and add a button on the right and click it to delete something. So we need to add a shortcut. To do this, we can tell our menu instance that we want to add a custom control mapping. That's basically just a shortcut. And then we say whenever we press a capital D, we are going to run a callable delete task. Deleting a task is kind of the same as toggling one. So when we delete a task, we get the menu instance. We have to fetch the task based on the selected text, and then delete it. And once it's deleted, we're going to build up the menu again. So if I restart this, go to foo, press Command D, capital D, it's going to be deleted, and this is pretty nice. Now, with this approach, one thing you kind of lose is the ability to automate tasks, right? So what I would do in this situation is I would still have these individual tasks, individual commands that allow me to add certain things or maybe delete. If you want to automate that, and you can just change your code maybe into actions so that you can reuse your logic. But from a user perspective, I think this is really nice because it just gives you something like a GUI on your terminal. All right, so now with the app more or less done, how do we actually distribute the app? With Laravel 0, what we can do is we can just tell our app to build. Then you can enter a version number if you want. And then Laravel 0 is putting the application into production mode, which basically means it's removing any dev dependencies that you have. It's going to hide certain commands on your CLI that are only used in development, such as make command and all the testing stuff. And then you end up with a far file in the builds directory. So it's 9.3 megabytes. But this is now a standalone file that you can share with others. That works just like the one built from source files. And if you, for example, publish this thing on packages now, you can just add the far file in there. People can just require your CLI app, and as the far file is included, just get used with it right away. OK, so this is pretty cool. I just want to give you a quick look at something that I'm working on, which goes in the same direction of publishing those apps. Because with far files, even though they are distributable and we can share them, one big issue is that the one that consumes our CLI application needs PHP, because we share a far file. And this limits the way that we can work with CLI apps in PHP. So I started working on something here. It's also a little Laravel 0 app. It only has an inspire command that shows the current PHP version I'm running, which is 8.0.18 right now. And it just prints out a quote. Now, if we build this into a far file, and then I am running the command, fair enough, it's going to use the same PHP version because it's a far, it's using my PHP locally. So I think, well, it would be cool if we could do something like build standalone. Once again, we could provide a version, and what this is now going to do, it's once again building the far file, but now the far file gets combined with basically a statically built PHP binary. So now in our builds directory, if we run CLI inspire, you can see that I'm no longer using 8.0.18, but now this is using 8.0.16, and that's because the CLI binary is using its built-in PHP app. And what's even cooler is that, well, this is now 13 megabytes, so it's only 4 megabytes larger than the far file alone. And as you can see, we also have an executable for Windows. So we can also just share this for Windows users. Nobody needs PHP installed. It just works right away. As I said, I'm still working on this. There are some things that don't easily compile statically, so it's a lot of work to get this done properly. But I think this is really cool and really brings the ability of PHP-based CLI apps to a new level. All right, that's all I have. Well, almost. And I hope that I was able, in 25 minutes time, to show you what you can do with CLI apps. Maybe you can, next time you build one, look into the CLI menu to create a more interesting user interface for your users. And, well, the last thing is, as I said, we create Tinkerwell, blah, blah, blah. This is not a commercial stuff. If you go to Tinkerwell app and use the coupon code that you have here, you can get Tinkerwell for free. So everyone gets a Tinkerwell. If you want, go enjoy that one. Thank you. I'm done.
Just checking. Just checking.
Yep.
You're a wizard, man. You're a wizard. You just live coded a CLI app for a task list without any notes. He's truly a wizard. Thanks for your talk. And I got a question for you. And where is it? So, Kevin DeHard, hopefully I'm not bashing too much your name. He's asking, so, who's going to build Norton Commander now?
Sorry?
Norton Commander on PHP.
Yeah, there's definitely, I feel like the whole PHP landscape is missing a lot when it comes to CLI apps, because if you look at Node or Rust or something like that, or .NET, they can do crazy stuff. Like you can click on things and scroll and have, like side-by-side editors like Norton. So I hope that we will someday have this in PHP.
It's on your plans?
No.
Okay. Sorry, Kevin. So another question. Robin Martins. It's a funny name. Sorry. He's asking, how's the database compiled in the build?
Yeah, so the database does not ship inside of the FAR file, because by default FAR files are read-only, so you couldn't write into the database if it's included in the FAR. But that's what's done in the service provider. Basically, we just tell the CLI app where to put the SQLite database. So if you would do something like that and distribute it, people would need to migrate their database. Or I guess you could also automatically migrate once when you run the command. But the database is not included in the FAR because they are read-only by default.
Thank you. Last one. No, not the last one, but when will the standalone manual, Piker Hill, he's asking, when will the standalone commander be published?
I'm also going to tweet that out. The library that I'm using for this is called PHP Micro. It's built by some Chinese guy. I have no idea how to even pronounce his name, but the way to build these FAR files into and bundle it with the PHP binary is already available. It's just not into Laravel 0 right now, and compiling it with a bunch of different PHP extensions doesn't work right now. But I can share the GitHub link to that.
Thank you again. Final question from an anonymous person.
Those are the best questions.
When will you be promoted as Marcel the White?
No comments.
So, a round of applause. Thank you for Marcel.
Thank you.